Israel has really towed this line. There have been about 600,000 Palestinian refugees who were sheltering in Rafah who have evacuated, according to UN officials, and so that's about half the population that had been sheltering there. So Israel really has moved into Rafah, but has not done so in a way that has crossed that line, according to Pentagon officials.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, we've been talking for a while about a possible Israeli offensive into Rafah. It's been a real point of contention between the Israeli government and the U.S. government. What's the current status?
So Israel has begun conducting limited operations on the outskirts of Rafah. Before that, they did encourage certain neighborhoods within the city to evacuate to a different area, which would ultimately be the area they were operating in. Now, the big question is, does what Israel is doing in Rafah right now cross the red line that the Biden administration announced last week? And to remind viewers, the Biden administration, or President Biden himself, specifically announced that if the U.S. conducted a full-scale ground invasion of Rafah, he would withhold military aid moving forward. And so that's a big deal. That was the first time he had made such a frank assessment towards the future of the U.S.-Israeli relationship.
And done it in a public setting.
Exactly. And so Israel has really towed this line. There have been about 600,000 Palestinian refugees who were sheltering in Rafah who have evacuated, according to UN officials. And so that's about half the population that had been sheltering there. So Israel really has moved into Rafah, but has not done so in a way that has crossed that line, according to Pentagon officials.
So there's also been talk of this Gaza pier. What would it do, and what's its current status?
So that's a great question. The president announced back in his State of the Union address in March that he had ordered the U.S. military to create a pier off Gaza's coast to supplement the way they would get aid into Gaza for those who desperately need it. And so at this point, the pier is now in place, and aid will start being delivered through it in the next couple of days. And so the way it works is aid is loaded onto these large, either commercial or military vessels out of Cyprus, and it travels several miles to a floating pier, which is sort of in the middle of the Mediterranean, but close to Gaza. The aid will be unloaded onto this floating pier, where it's put onto smaller Navy ships, reason being because these ships can get closer to the Gaza coast, given the the shallow waters. And so then the aid is brought from these smaller boats to a causeway which is attached to the beach, where it's driven by truck, and then it's brought onto land and distributed from there. That being said, U.S. forces are not on the ground in Gaza and are not the only ones responsible for this entire project. The U.S. military will not have any boots on the ground in Gaza, or even driving those trucks on the causeway.
So there's not much risk to U.S. personnel.
Exactly. There have been times in the last couple of weeks where the loading area on Gaza's beaches have been attacked by mortars from Hamas or other terror entities, but that's not where U.S. troops will be stationed anyway. And so it does it does emphasize that this is an active war zone and there are risks, but the U.S., their number one priority in this whole situation is ensuring the safety of its forces. And so we are led to believe that this will help increase aid, but is not supposed to be the new primary method. Whether it's the U.S. or UN officials, they've all said publicly that the most impactful way to get aid into Gaza is through the land crossings between Gaza and Egypt and Gaza and Israel. And so they plan to continue pushing aid through those channels, and they will use this pier to supplement that.
So a big question ahead for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is what comes next in Gaza in the event he's even able to achieve his military objectives.
That's exactly right, and it's a question that people have been asking for months now. And so we haven't heard a clear plan from the Prime Minister, and it has really shown some divides both within the Israeli military community as well as within the U.S.
Right.
And so it's not exactly clear who will govern Gaza if Israel is able to achieve its goal of removing Hamas from power. Now, we heard from Defense Minister Gallant this week some criticism towards the Prime Minister for not having a plan. And we've seen that actually somewhat play out because in multiple instances, Israel has had to go back into areas where it had previously cleared Hamas out to only re-engage with them because they had come back. And so part of what's happening is there is a lawlessness without a government, especially in northern Gaza. And so we've heard criticism that Israel had not thought ahead enough to potentially establish partners on the ground to eventually take over. And as of right now, Hamas is not really in power in Gaza from a political sense, but still controls what happens on the ground. And there's no perfect entity to take over moving forward because Israel doesn't support the Palestinian Authority to do so.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.